Hello and welcome to the Spirit World Center podcast. I am honored to be joined here today by Peter Mark Adams. Peter is an author who has written on a number of really fascinating esoteric topics, and we have him here today to talk about his book, The Power of the Healing Field: Energy Medicine, Psi Abilities, and Ancestral Healing. And I have to say, when I was reading through this book, I'm not a fan of dog earing a book, but I didn't have a highlighter on me, and so this book is now thoroughly dog eared, like every other page. And honestly, I'm thinking I'm going to have to make it recommended reading for our students because it's a wonderful compendium of all these different healing modalities and how they fit together and how they can be looked at conceptually as they work with this healing field. So just a bit more about Peter Mark Adams before we jump into the interview, reading from his Amazon bio here. Peter Mark Adams is an author, poet, and essayist specializing in the ethnography and visuality of ritual, sacred landscape, esotericism, consciousness, and healing. Peter has over 20 years experience with energy-based healing modalities, including rebirthing breathwork, meridian therapies, and Reiki. As a professional author, Peter's nonfiction is published by Scarlet Imprint and Inner Traditions. Literary prose and poetry, largely in the Corbel Stone Press Literary Journal, Reliquae, Journal of Nature, Landscape, and Mythology. His books include The Tower of Kronos, Tyranny and the Architecture of Descent in 6th Century Byzantium. Oh, that's forthcoming. As well as Miste, Dancing Out the Mysteries of Dionysos. A Guide to the Trumps and Court Cards of the Solabusca Tarocchi, The Game of Saturn, Decoding the Solabusca Tarocchi, and The Healing Field: Energy, Consciousness, and Transformation. I am incredibly honored to have Peter on with me today. Peter, how are you today?
Super. Looking forward to talking with you, Eric.
I think this is going to be a fantastic interview. It's something that I've always really put on a pedestal: practical knowledge that comes from experience.
Yeah.
And I see in this book so many things that my partner Lauva and I have come to over time to understand through our working with a shamanic modality. And I'm reading through this book, and just even little things that you say, I'm just constantly nodding my head to the point where my neck is getting sore. It's just like it's quite a book. And with your experience working with rebirthing breathwork, meridian therapies, Reiki, it's fascinating how you've come to these common understandings. So I guess my first question for you is, what brought you to write The Power of the Healing Field? And what brought you to have these understandings?
I think my engagement with energy work, let's see, on a broader scale, really goes back to my early teens when I was practicing and training the martial arts. And it's rather strange, but the same energy system that underpins acupuncture underpins the practice of the martial arts. So it was from there that I really learned about the generating inner energy, the cleansing of channels. I did karate and Tai Chi at the time, so it's all about developing an inner energy and the movement of that energy, and that naturally fed into energy healing. Okay, so but I guess the thing that really turned me on to energy healing was encountering Reiki energy, and that was such a powerful experience for me. It really kind of set the course for the next 25 years.
It's amazing what comes with Reiki, especially, and something that you allude to later in your book as well, in terms of how certain entities, higher entities, say, can become involved. I was actually just having an interview, I don't think it's published yet, of one woman who, during her initiation, she had a whole lot of entities coming through and interacting and everything. So it's amazing how you reach that heightened state of energy, and then very interesting things start to happen that, you know, don't exactly fit within our materialist worldview.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I met my first Reiki teacher, she was highly energized individual. And we were sitting there listening to her, and I started seeing all these blobs of green like floating past my eyes. And I was like rubbing my eyes. I was looking out of the window. No, there's nothing there. You know, I look at her again, and these blobs started to come together and to form like a flowing oil paint across the surface of her skin. It was interfused with a real sapphire blue, and it was emanating a green aura all around her, you know. So being in her presence was sufficient for me to start seeing psychically. You know, this was the healing energy in its essence.
And it's always interesting because there's a variety of ways that these kind of experiences come through, I find. Did you feel like you were seeing it in your inner eye, in your kind of third eye as an overlay, or did you feel like you were actually seeing it with your physical eyes?
That's normally you have the sense of an overlay because conceptually you can't make sense of it.
Mhm.
I mean, it doesn't exist on a vibrational level that is apparent to normal vision. Certainly my partner, Kenzie, was with me. She couldn't see anything. Okay. And we're sitting together looking at this woman. But for me, it was absolutely crystal clear. Okay. I could see her, and then I could see all this energy. So it's a very curious experience, really, encountering these higher energies.
I absolutely loved in your book how you're talking about the healing field. You're talking about these various, I suppose the healing field kind of breaks down into a number of different fields, right?
Yeah.
That come together and that you're working with in the healing process. I really liked conceptually how you brought that together. So what would you say is the healing field?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that my conception is panpsychic. Okay. It's the notion that consciousness is interwoven with reality on every level. Okay. And that's not the usual conception that we have of the brain producing consciousness.
I feel this is probably why I was nodding my head so much, because yes, my conception is also animist, panpsychic, whatever you want to say. I'm always saying, you know, consciousness is primary, the bedrock of everything. Everything else just kind of falls out of that, right? So,
Well,
anyways,
just 2 weeks ago, there was this new paper in one of the science journals. It was the kind of the self-recognition hypothesis of quantum mechanics, which was basic. I mean, it had a much longer, grander title than that, but basically it was asserting that the entire universe is a conscious mechanism with a teleological or underlying teleological, you know, driver. That's to say, it's consciously evolving itself. And see this in a paper in one of the physics journals, right? Just blew me away.
okay, times are changing if that's getting published. Wow.
That was self-simulation hypothesis interpretation of quantum mechanics, if you want to look it up.
Times are changing.
Self-simulation hypothesis interpretation.
Well, there's a lot of scientists and philosophers who are coming to that panpsychic idea. It's needed for a lot of
Oh,
quantum
yeah.
weirdness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Schrodinger back in, what was it, the 30s, wrote a kind of a monograph. It's like a long essay. What is life, right? And
Hmm.
he talks about entropy versus syntropy. And the way he describes syntropy is a description of the healing force. I mean, it tends to unify and rejuvenate and do all those things, you know. So that was postulated back then, you know. So of course, a lot of physicists since then have, you know, whether they were very open about it or not, you can tell they had those same thoughts. You
I
know?
gotta give that a read.
Yeah.
So, would you say then that this healing field is consciousness?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Consciousness is primary. And you see, the problem when we come to healing is that we have this biomedical model, which says, you know, you have your like present awareness, you have biographical memory, and you have the biographical unconscious, and that's it. And the problem is when you do some years of, real healing work, you find people accessing memories from the perinatal, that's to say, the period in around their period in the womb and in their birth process, when medicine says they don't have enough brain to have experience. Okay, but the memories are crystal clear. And then you find people with memories of past lives, often traumatic deaths in past lives, to be honest. Beyond that, they have memories of family events and ancestral events. And none of this is, in any way connected to their biographical timeline as we have it in a conventional way. It's all exterior.
Exactly. And it's like these narratives are getting written within consciousness. I found it so fascinating when you're talking about the perinatal experiences that people have, where experiences that the mother had before birth are somehow creating these webs of meaning within the person later in life. And as you rightly point out, right, that the scientific understanding is that you're not even thinking at that age when you're still in utero, and yet even is more complex than that, because it's not just like that you're incapable of experience, right, but rather there's these meanings that are coming through, these complex narratives and meanings that are getting ingrained into the fetus that you would definitely think the brain is not capable at that time to understand things like loss and abandonment and mother issues and that type of thing. So it's quite fascinating, the complexity that is occurring even at that stage.
Yeah, and this feeds directly into the central premise of animism, doesn't it? The essential personhood of all, sentient life forms. I was looking at stuff today about these mushrooms having a conversation, with each other. Electrical, the kind of mirrored the way our language is. That was very strange in its energetic peaks and troughs and so on. So yeah, it has huge implications for how we conduct ourselves in the world.
Absolutely. And it really enlarges our sense of self, as I believe you're alluding to in the book, right? Where you start with this, this immediate experiences that you're having, but then, okay, there's the biographical conscious and unconscious, but then you have to start going further back, right? There's the prenatal, there's and then you start getting into ancestral things, and you start getting into the family consciousness, right? And so this is all being summed up within this healing field that you can begin to work with through all these different modalities. Would that sum it up correctly?
Yeah, definitely the repository is that, even though it has these layers or strata within it. But there's another aspect of the healing field that's seldom talked about, and that's when you engage one-on-one or in a family constellation, you generate a field between yourself and the client. Okay, and in family constellations, I know if people know how that works, but let me just briefly state it because it's really to the point here. If you go along to family constellations, generally you'll go as a participating observer. And what you find there, of course, is the therapist and a couple of people who want the therapy. And then there's a group of strangers, essentially, who are these participating observers. And the person who wants the therapy goes around and selects members from this group to represent key elements of their family system for the mother, brother, whatever, or even people who've long passed and gone. Okay, it doesn't matter. And when that system is positioned in the middle of the floor in relation to each other, so like some people are facing each other, some people are distant, so on, it kind of mirrors the family situation. What happens then is that for those people standing there, suddenly get an emotional overlay, so that while they retain full awareness, consciousness of their own thoughts, feelings, everything, access an emotional overlay that is not theirs. Okay, thoughts, feelings, and even bodily posture that is totally alien to them. And then the therapist can go around and check out where the nexus of trauma is within this pattern of energy. Okay, so what has happened is by symbolically representing the system, you've generated a field. And then when a one-on-one healing situation occurs, the healer and the client generate a field between them. And it's via the field that you access the larger field of consciousness. Your awareness is able to navigate. And one other thing about that navigation, it tends to bring forth the information that's relevant to the healing.
Right.
That's to say, the navigation is teleological. It's reverse causation in the field.
One thing that strikes me about this is, I'm coming at it from a shamanic understanding here. I look at the participants who have been arranged in these various engagements and relationship to each other, representing the relationships of the ancestors.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this, I'm seeing this energetic overlay then come over them, right? Where they start acting like the ancestor, even though they never knew this person, right? But they can start saying things even that that person wouldn't know, but that the ancestor in this case would. I'm looking at it, it's like it's in essence a low level possession. And I'm curious, is it enough to just put them into those relationships in this room, like these kind of spatial relationships, or does the overseer of all this, like, do they do an invocation to the ancestors? Is there anything like that, or is it kind of just setting up the grounds?
Okay, I mean, the constellations I went to were managed by a very shamanically inclined woman. I mean, she had a training in Jungian psychology, but she was also very much into shamanism. And she brought that kind of energy and that kind of healing. I mean, it's like if I do healing, probably the Reiki entities are around anyway, whether I call them or not, because from their perspective, this is a healing context and it is their business to get engaged with it and to facilitate it, right? They don't exist in these religious boxes. So there's every possibility that certain entities are engaging with this, every possibility. But I would suspect that in the more formal, like Bert Hellinger style ways of doing family constellation, it could be considerably drier, but it would still work just as well because the field is informative.
Yeah, because you're setting up the grounds where these things can come through and that this kind of experience can happen, right? Exactly. It doesn't require that spoken intent, let's say, of let the ancestors come on through, right? It can be like, okay, the opportunity is there, so take it.
There's a big issue about this intensity, and I think people need to understand that when they're choosing amongst therapies and therapists, that different levels of intensity can arise with different people in situations, So some people are going to be disturbed with a lot of intensity and others are going to love it. And other people are going to be very bored by low levels of intensity and like formulaic ways of going about things. So people need to be aware that these techniques all exist on a spectrum. Okay, so like if you're doing rebirthing breath work, you can do it fairly gently, to be honest. The middle ground is pretty intense. And then if you do like holotropic breath work, which Dr. Stanislav Grof engineered, is really intense. And the experiences that come up in the intense forms of these practices tend to go a lot deeper into the grain of reality. So let me just illustrate that. Stanislav Grof, of course, was one of the research psychiatrists who developed LSD, and he became a key figure in the transpersonal psychology movement. He got trained in rebirthing breathwork from its founder, Leonard Orr, and then he developed it by adding in music and lights and, really shamanic. And the people started surfacing memories, for instance, of being abducted by aliens. Okay, so that's the intense end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is you do some gentle breathing, and over the course of 7-8 sessions, you kind of energize yourself and free yourself up. So people need to be aware of the same technique across different levels of intensity. And you get some really interesting results at high levels of energy.
That's so true. And I think the point to point out is there's nothing wrong with if you're not ready for higher levels of intensity, right? Like I know
Yeah,
some people,
you
myself included,
just need to be in your comfort zone, really,
yeah,
don't you?
some people, myself included, I just love to jump completely out of my comfort zone. I will jump into anything. I just want to break reality and see what happens. But
Okay.
at the same time, some people, it's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
people are at, many different levels of
Yeah.
that spectrum of,
Yeah.
and the thing is that as long as you're persistent, you'll get somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
The only thing is people need to be aware of the phenomena of re-traumatization.
Hmm.
That's to say, if they're too much on the edge of what they can tolerate, it may be okay 2 or 3 times, but by the 6th, 7th time, they'll start to have an aversion to the therapy. Okay, it only emerges a bit later, and then they don't want to practice it anymore. So there is this is a fairly sophisticated point, I know, but you need to be aware that people need to be aware that re-traumatization can occur at the more intense levels when you're out of your comfort zone.
I felt like you had a good example of that in the book where you're talking about this individual who's undergoing a 7-day meditation retreat, right?
Mm,
And they're okay at 5 days, but then after that, it starts falling apart.
yeah, yeah. Same with the intense Kundalini practices. It can also get really way out and beyond control. Basically, that's the problem. Getting back. You often fall off the cliff, and it's a bit too late to try and climb your way back up there. You're dropping.
Right, right. It's really curious, the interplay between energy and consciousness. And I'm wondering if you could go into that a bit more. In the book, you mentioned, the interplay between Qi and Li, right? The
Okay, yeah.
lame rider. And so I'm curious if you can go into that.
Well, it just follows on from panpsychism, essentially, that, consciousness is distributed. Consciousness, energy are the two sides of the same coin, which is
Mm.
reality. Okay, so from that perspective, we find that when we increase the quality and amount of energy within the field we're working with, consciousness shifts into other dimensions and opens, unfolds aspects of reality that are otherwise hidden from us. And those folds of reality can often contain entities, beings, and whole worlds that we're not normally aware of. And this can get very Carlos Castaneda, very damn fast.
I thought that was a fascinating point of that raising of energy that allows for that shift in consciousness. That
Yeah,
was a very,
yeah.
because then you can see how that raising of consciousness is happening across all these various systems, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's
Well, so when you have this like one-on-one situation with a client, and you're the healer, there's this energy field comes into play, and immediately that allows you to shift into a far more intuitive and empathic level of awareness. And empathy really is the bridging mechanism, because that's where you pick up information pure, straight from their field, from their ancestral field, from past lives, although it might be presented to you in a symbolic form. It's not necessarily sentences, it's a picture, a vivid picture. And when you play that back to the client, they immediately connect with the emotion underlying. So as long as you've got the techniques, you can then clear.
that was a fascinating part of the book that I found, which is where you're talking about the mindset of the healer and what they have to do. It's basically you have multiple steps, but the one is trusting that, let's say, some symbol or some meaning is going to come through that's perfect for that situation, right? It's almost
Yeah.
relying on a synchronicity to happen to enable that healing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yet that, in my experience, that's exactly what I found as well, where I'm really sitting down to help someone through a healing process. Sometimes you just like, for me, it doesn't really come through as a symbol or a meaning or anything. It more comes through as just a sudden intuition, that's like, okay, I
Exactly.
have no reason to suspect this, but
Yeah.
okay, it feels like something, and I'm just going to run
Yeah.
with it and see where it
Yeah.
goes, right?
Yeah.
And you
So
come to trust your intuition. And so,
yeah.
yeah, what is that mindset of the healer that you feel is needed, and what is that process of relying on?
I think as you say, it's allowing it to happen. It's being engaged with a positive outcome, and you're open to how you achieve that outcome, which is healing. Okay. So that's a goal-driven process. And in and of itself, it's sufficient to extract from the field the relevant information and feed it direct to you. That's the process. It's that simple. So when we engage holistically, fully with a client, it's sufficient navigation to draw from the field the critical information. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing divination, dowsing, all of these techniques. You don't need two rods to do dowsing, because it's the same process, essentially. Dowsing gets you started when you hold a couple of rods, but essentially what you're doing is engaging with a certain outcome and then allowing the field to extract the information and feed it to you. I say it's teleological process, end or goal driven. And that's
Right.
so contrary to our normal understanding of causation. But that's how it is.
And this term teleology might be foreign to some people. And in my mind, it's very much like a teleology is where you have this end result, this end goal, and then everything is kind of working towards meeting that. Is that, would
Yeah,
you be saying, yeah,
it,
you're using the
yeah,
same
to
way?
its realization, absolutely.
And so in that sense, then this teleology you're talking about, like are, I think you get into this in the later chapters, is that this universe is kind of a teleology of healing.
Yeah, that's what this quantum mechanics paper a couple of weeks ago was like saying. The universe is a teleological machine. It's going somewhere. It's self-aware, and it's growing in its self-awareness. So it's directed. It's a really it's like turn physics on its head, and you got it.
Yep. Yep. As I've always heard, right? Science does not like teleologies.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
they
not a
don't like it
popular
one.
idea. So it's quite amazing that that's coming in, actually. I mean, that's um, you always hear that panpsychism is getting adopted by a lot more, scientists and physicists,
Yeah,
guys like
yeah,
Thomas Nagel and all this. But
yeah.
at the
Well,
same
Rupert
time,
Sheldrake especially,
oh yes, for sure. And
big
morphogenetic
time.
fields play a huge part in your understanding of the healing field as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. His work has been fundamental in giving that kind of intellectual legitimacy to what we are experiencing. Um,
Times are
and
finally changing, maybe. Maybe the
yeah,
physicalist
well,
paradigm is falling away.
slowly. Yeah, that's how it goes, bit by bit.
And so if there is a teleology of healing, where do you think that is going, like from a kind of a practical human standpoint? Like what is the future? How can we play our part in that teleology as well?
Okay, the best model I've seen is what is now called spiral dynamics. It was like developed by Claire Graves back in the 50s and early 60s, I think.
My partner Lauva absolutely loves that book.
Yeah, you see, one of the things that struck me about family constellations is that the important traumas from the past are not like, a brick dropped on your head. It's rather like there was a betrayal. There was, a fundamental violation of ethical principle. And that's the trauma that gets locked in the ancestral and familial line. Okay, so that taught me that the field is essentially an ethical field. Its traumas are ethical disturbances and imbalances, and therefore the correction of them is the reverse. It's acknowledging wrong and forgiving.
Right.
Okay, so if the field has this ethical nature and is driven towards its own self-realization, then we can posit evolution as a spiraling movement in terms of ethical refinement towards a higher order of being. And spiral dynamics captures some of that. Okay.
That is a fascinating point that you make there, which is that morality or ethics, these moral statements, are built into this field, that they're being kept there. What that tells me is that the narratives, the meanings that we have in our mind, they're captured there in the field. They are continuing throughout time, right? And so this healing process is resolving those
essentially
those beliefs, having
Of
healing,
course,
having
we're constantly causing fresh violations
yes.
within the field. That's the problem. So, but I would separate morality from ethics in this context. That's to say, the ethical principles are far more generic and applicable, and they are what the field seems to consist of, whereas the moral judgments arising from them are very much situated in time and space, in culture and society, subgroups of society.
Mm-hmm.
But the underlying, I mean, the underlying ethnography of ritual is fairly well defined now. I've given a couple of leads about that in the book, I think. Schweder and various other people who've looked at ethics on a global basis. You got ethics of community, ethics of divinity, and ethics of autonomy. So finding the balance between those three is the essence of it.
One thing you say there gets me thinking, and something that my partner and I have heard in our shamanic work and from the spirits so much is that the ancestors need us for healing, that the ancestors need their current progeny, for healing. In other words, it's not enough for this healing to, in our understanding of it, to go on in the spirit world. Rather, this kind of ancestral trauma can only play out when we, the living, are reaching back and working with it and providing this playground really for healing. And something I'm hearing when you talk about the field and the ancestral part of the field playing out, requiring healing through our actions, through this teleology. It's kind of meaning to me the same thing, which is that we are healing all this part of this path, the stored part of the past, through our current actions, right? That maybe the field can't heal itself. It needs us to do it for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So this really revolves around the paradox of time. Okay. So, we're like locked into this linear mindset. But the only actual time that there is the present moment. We're like, frozen in a perpetual present moment of time. Okay. So I understand that time is not actually a feature of the field itself. It's an imposition upon it as we attempt to make sense of it. So when you're healing the ancestral trauma, you're healing it at the time it occurred, in a sense, because this paradox of time comes into play. So the ancestors are like you as you enact the healing of the trauma. The time sense only comes later when we try and figure out what's going on in the field, right? This happened then, this happened in some past life, but actually it's all, in a sense, contemporary. There isn't a real time dimension. We only have now. It's an eternal, great, yawning, massive now that we're immersed within. I mean, this is a bit Kurt Vonnegut, I know, but I don't know if you read The Slaughterhouse-Five, but
jumping through time. It absolutely, that is a fantastic insight, and it meshes with so much of what we do. A common ancestral healing technique is, you enter trance, go to the spirit world, you track your ancestral line back as far as you can to where an initial pain or an initial harm
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
and you help that ancestor, you heal
Yeah.
that hurt. And then it's like a domino effect, right? Because
That's right.
now, you know,
Ripples
it
through. Yeah.
moves through all the
Yeah.
further generations. You just had to go back to that first one, and then you heal
Yeah.
that, and then suddenly
Yeah.
something happens throughout the line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know,
Exactly.
it's happening, you know, because there is no time, this paradox of time that you're talking
Yeah.
about, right? There
Yeah.
is only this current moment, so you
Yeah.
can heal past
And we
wounds.
find this again and again when we have clients and we do the healing process with them, and they go away and they come back and they say, well, all my reality just changed, because all their relationships have now been refigured, reconfigured within the field of their, you know, continuity. I mean, it's not that they're not in the same reality anymore. It's all changed. It's all better. So yeah, the ripple effect is throughout. It's the essence of the healing domino, actually, isn't it? You know, just
Mhm. Exactly. Things have shifted now
time,
in
through
this eternal now.
relationships, laterally, you know. Yeah, it goes all directions. So this is the truly stunning potential that we have with the healing work that we do. And the reason I wrote this book is to make these techniques and the types of issue you can deploy them with clearer to everybody, and to encourage them to go off, master one or two of the techniques that really appeal to them, and then go for it. Heal themselves, heal their relationships, their family, their friends, community, and become a part of this this rolling energy of healing and reintegrating the field.
Right. And yeah, your book is full of so many fascinating examples, which I thought was really curious what you did there. You said, okay, these are not representative of what every healing session is like, but they are, you know, they show how this healing field is working, right? They are
Yeah,
very
yeah,
demonstrative.
yeah,
And so I encourage everyone to check out the book, because you have all these examples of how, you know, this healing is working at, you know, at its most base level. And then also, your book is an amazing compendium of all these different healing styles, right? It's like, okay, everybody
yeah,
just
yeah,
choose one and run with
yeah.
it, right?
Go with it, you know. I always say to people that EFT, emotional freedom techniques, is the fastest, easiest, most productive entry to the world of energy healing there is. You know, it takes 5 minutes to learn it, and it's effective immediately. And like, they're clearing post-traumatic stress disorder with that technique. You know,
Mhm.
it's absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. And in that case of EFT, how would you say, like, just to give an example of how this is working, how would you say EFT is clearing up these types of problems? So how is that interacting with the field, with the energy, with consciousness?
Normally, when you work with EFT, you need to have a clear and present focus on a specific issue, mental, emotional, physical. And then the textbook or classic EFT is that you tap on the heads of the major meridians, which are like on the face, basically. And that the kinetic effect of this tapping on meridian channels is sufficient to like throw off the emotional problem. And that's fine. It works great. There's no problem with that, except that you soon learn that you can tap your face for another person and they get healed. And then you learn that, like, well, you don't have to tap. You can imagine tapping and the healing still takes place. And the person can be on the other side of the world and you tap, you know, imagine tapping for them and they get healed. And then all of a sudden, what are you dealing with anymore?
Any physicalist understanding has fallen out the window. It's gone.
Basically. And so you're interacting directly with the field through your intent, and it's sufficient to affect healing, even though it's on the other side of the world.
You raise an interesting keyword there, intent. And myself, I've always taught that, intention is the key of everything. And that's like, for instance, when we're doing a cleansing,
Yeah,
and so you can go through the house and you can, like, you can use your sage, or you can, burn your incense, or you can beat your drum, or you can use chant,
yeah,
right, to cleanse, let's say, a space. And you know, I've always said, look, the incense or the drum beat doesn't have any power of its own. It's the
yeah,
fact that it's tied to your intention, that
yes,
you are having your intention being carried out to the universe through that incense smoke. Or with each drum beat, that sound wave is carrying your intention out, right? And
yeah,
it's the
absolutely.
symbolic means of expressing. So do you think there's anything there that are a lot of these modalities of healing? Is it what they're sharing is intention, and they're just being, that intention's being expressed in various ways?
Well, I think there's two answers. One is yes, intent is being expressed, but there may well be entities and spirits that you're working with who affect the healing or the cleansing. And it was one, I mean, normally we had an office until the pandemic started, and we closed it down 2 years ago. But doing intensive energy work in the office, of course, the atmosphere gets very clogged, and you start seeing, effects of that. So we're routinely cleansing the place with the, smudging, basically. But on one occasion, we brought a guy in to do it. I don't know how we made the connection with him, and he had this, like, book with him and all these bits of paper and diagrams, and and he was saying, well, he does a kind of angelic magic,
Okay.
or kind of the jinn kind of thing. Oh, well, he has a good reputation for getting results. So we decided to pay him and let him cleanse the office, for us, for a change. So we were standing in the admin room just looking through the invoices and this, and I saw it as distinctly as day. A white sheet came across my visual field from right to left. And as it did so, it's like getting brushed by the wing of an angel or something. Both our knees went, and we almost fell. We just grabbed the edge of the table, and
Hmm.
this passed through the office. I mean, it was really cleansed. But in that case, there was a real entity that had been summoned and had conducted this cleansing. I actually saw it as like just a white passing, I say, like it was brushed by the wing of an angel. It's devastatingly powerful. It's more than your energy body can sustain.
And that's a huge thing to point out. Absolutely, is that it doesn't always have to be your energy, right? I mean,
Yeah,
your energy is limited to a good
yeah,
degree, right? But
absolutely.
there's obviously techniques for, increasing
Yeah,
it and replenishing it and all this. But when you're doing things like cleansing or manifestation, various kinds of
yeah.
magic or healing,
Mm,
it's not always necessary to just use your own energy. You
mm,
can absolutely, you can use that energy, a little bit of energy, to make the phone call, to call a more powerful entity, right,
yeah,
to do that. um Absolutely, it's a great ability to, to call in backup like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Have you had a lot of experiences working with entities within these kind of modalities, connecting with entities?
There's one case, I think it's in the book, is when I went to see this guy called Tom Kenyon. And he like has this singing, this incredible multi-octave voice. And I was just dragged over there. I had no idea what it was, what I was going to see or experience. But he was just sitting on a chair in the auditorium, and he starts singing with this wonderful, incredible high voice. And I saw, like, around him, these tall columns of light, each one 3 or 4 meters tall, suddenly appeared on the apron. And then after a few minutes, they like floated up through the seating and then disappeared. One of them kind of passed right through me. It was really strange stuff. What's this? And at the end of it, somebody said, well, he calls these entities the Hathors, which, didn't make any sense to me. What's the Egyptian deities got to do with anything? And he said, well, when they appear, he said, they appear as these tall columns of light, you know. So I don't know anyone else who was with me who saw them. I saw them quite clearly, quite distinctly. So there's a case where totally unexpectedly, like, they showed up. I was able to see them. I was able to get confirmation that what I'd seen was veridical, and that nobody else appears to have noticed anything at all. So yes, you know, these beings exist. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And, you know, in the higher yoga tantra, they are still manifesting, even for crowds of 250,000, 500,000 people go for the Vajrayana initiations, the big initiations, and those beings show up. So, and they bestow single-minded or non-dual awareness, which is a temporary state of enlightenment, essentially. So at least, you know, you kind of know where you're going thereafter. You can't sustain that state, okay? You know, after the initiation, it drops away from you. But having had it, it changes everything.
You know, it's possible, right?
It's not, yeah, it's possible. You've experienced it or you've seen it. So it's kind of, yeah, that's there. So when you're doing what I would call the lesser initiations, like you're initiating people to Reiki, Usui Reiki, you know, I mean that because I know the lineage is valid, okay? You know the entities and beings show up before the initiation process starts. So when you form the intent, okay, we're going to do the initiation, immediately that room has that presence within it, you know, and you start initiating people. Again, it's not your energy whatsoever with Reiki. You know, that's a total no-no, right? You never put your own energy into it.
You're being initiated into that line of energy, though, right?
Yeah.
That the access to that energy is being initiated into you, right?
And that's true even when you're giving the Reiki healing itself. You know, your own energy is out of the equation. So it's totally a channel and channeling experience. So, you know, if you do Reiki properly, which is, say, in the first like week, 10 days after the initiation, you practice it every single day. Within that period, your hands will be burning with the energy. You'll know you got it. And people you treat or animals you treat will know you have that energy. You know, I've seen a dog come in a park like 200 meters away and make a beeline for me and then showed its belly, you know. And the owner's saying, oh, I don't know what's wrong with this. I can't believe it. You know, the dog had an operation 2 days before. Okay, and it has spotted my energy clear across the park and come to me and known that it was going to get healing. So these energies are visible to other beings, sadly, too little to human beings.
Well, here's a really random question for you. Do you feel like these healing modalities exist within the animal world, within the natural world?
The recognition of them certainly does. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt. I'll tell you a strange story that there are also like parasitic entities. Okay. And that may be somebody who has died and like not realized they're dead and then tries to cling on to somebody's energy body. Say they're in a hospital, you know, they had an anesthetic, they're not in a, their energy body is disturbed. So they may get an energetic attachment. You know, of course, the sign of this is that there's like a residual pain or stiffness that doesn't go away weeks after the operation. Okay, so it can often be a sign. But there are far more dynamic energy parasites as well. And some of them are located in certain locations. And some of them are called in certain situations, generally of a very negative nature, you know. So yeah, I don't know how we got onto this topic, but
well,
there is a whole zoo.
Yeah.
Of,
it was whether in the natural world they
what I was
they
going
have
to
these healings.
say, what I was going to say in relation to that is very often your pets become aware if any of these intrusive entities enter your space. And cats especially are known for defending the house, even to the extent that they'll take on the energy parasite. And we had one cat who almost died. When we managed to release the energy parasite from it, you know, it was like it left the room like a shadowy shape. And that's happened a couple of times. There was one occasion where Kenzie dealt with somebody who basically couldn't eat or drink, and they were in a very poor condition. And it transpired that they had had a spell cast, that this person had managed, God knows how, sending this entity, whether it was artificial or some kind of parasitic entity, had attached themselves to this guy. And during the course of the treatment, it came off. And we had told him to put his hands into the soil and release it, you know. And that was great, you know, he was so grateful. But the next day we were walking the dog and we passed that spot and the dog collapsed and it was totally paralyzed on the back legs. And it took us almost a month to recover function. So, you know, this interplay between ourselves, the other world, its entities, and the animal world is quite intimate. And the animals are acutely aware of these presences. You know, you often see the cats watching something pass through the room, you know, which is invisible to ourselves. You've probably noticed it many times.
I was actually going to ask you about that particular story where
Right.
your dog suffered that incident.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. Speaking about animals and such, Lauva and I, we do a lot of channeling, and we get a lot of interesting information through there. Just want to offhand comment though, is whenever Lauva is channeling, the family dog will not come near her. He'll like
Oh, wow.
peek its head in the room, and
Yeah.
then it'll be like, something's off here, and it'll like just kind of slink back and like slowly back out of the room and then and then leave, right? Because it can tell, yeah, even if it's a positive entity, right? They can tell that the energies are different here, right? Like this
Oh,
isn't
absolutely.
Lauva right now, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I was going to ask you about that experience that you're about this individual who couldn't eat for so long and that
Yeah.
had spell casts on them,
Yeah.
because something that we actually have gotten through channeling ourselves is basically an understanding of how curses work. And I've always understood, because of this channeling, I've understood curses as you're putting out this negative energy towards someone, but at the same time, you're inviting negative and parasitic entities to go after that person.
Yeah.
And they are going to, you know, use that energy that you give them to start things going with that person, to start feeding on them. And that becomes its own continuous thing, self-feeding thing. And so I read that story, I'm thinking, well, this, you know, this exactly sounds like this person did have this curse on them that they couldn't
Yeah.
eat for so long. And it sounds like he had, you know, a relationship when he
Yeah.
was deployed that very much, you know, you say spell, but I'm thinking, yeah, also curse, you know, that some negative parasitic entity was sent after this individual.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then
You know,
unfortunately,
it's a rare gift, thank goodness, to be able to do that. You know,
yes, thankfully, yes, exactly.
thankfully, you know, that raises the issue of ethics
Oh, hugely.
in a mega way, you know.
Yeah, well, it's one of these problems, right? Where you you have people, let's say, learning witchcraft and Wicca when they're like 15, 16 years old, right? Where they don't have the ethics yet. They just know that
Yeah.
they're being pestered at school by someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
give them these tools where they can literally, you know, do all these things and not get in trouble and not get caught because our society doesn't say that it's real.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you know, it can have these devastating effects, and nonetheless, and also devastating effects for the person sending out that curse as well. It
Well,
has an effect on your soul.
one of the stories I didn't include in the book, but it's on my academia.edu site, is called the Lord of the Flies,
Hmm.
the phenomenology of a possession. And I got the the client's permission to document that in detail, because I thought it is important that somewhere this account should be recorded and made available, although
Okay.
it wasn't suitable to put in the book itself. But it's a case where they have this parasitic attachment that presents itself as a beautiful woman and has sex with them to orgasm and on an ongoing basis. And they came to me because they had, they're fairly psychic themselves, but they had seen these like black grape-like objects clustered around their aura in their legs. And they came to me to get these cleared. So like I cleaned them all off, and the next week he's back again, clean them all off again. Third week he's back. I said, what's going on? There has to be something more to this. And then I got the story of the night visits,
Right.
the nocturnal visits of this beautiful woman having sex with him, and he has an orgasm again and again. And as we did the cleansing work on him and his aura, he was able to spot that the entity was adopting a shape and form from his unconscious to clothe itself.
Yeah.
It was actually this like fly-like object that was using the extracted energy to breed entities itself. So I documented all that. It's on the academia.edu for those who need to go deeper. But it didn't seem suitable in a book, in this particular book, which is fairly uplifting. But, it can get very heavy. And I advise, unless you're a specialist in entity removal, I mean, if you really know your stuff, don't touch it, because it boomerangs so fast and so easily.
Mm-hmm.
People got to take care. You've got to be realistic about their skill level when this stuff surfaces. Know when to refer on and when to deal with something.
Absolutely. It's very important for people to understand that there is a dark side to all this. And, unfortunately, within certain kind of new age mindset, sometimes people don't want to recognize that there are darker things out there, but there certainly are.
I don't see them necessarily as dark now. I used to. Now I see them more as just like they're parasites. I mean, a tiger is not a dark thing, but if it's in your living room, it's probably not in the right place, right?
Exactly. It's negative from a human viewpoint.
Yeah.
The same way if you go out in the forest, right? You go out into the forest and there's going to be all these benevolent beings around you, squirrels and deer and trees and mushrooms, but then there's going to be parasites and predators, right? There's going to be the mosquitoes, and if you step into a marsh, you might get a leech, right? And as you say, there's nothing evil about a leech, right? It just wants to get your blood and make little leech babies. Right. Exactly like your fly entity there, right? It just wanted to get that sexual energy from that person, and then create little babies of itself, right? Not evil, but from a human standpoint, it has effects the same way that a leech does on a human.
What fascinated me was the quality of sentience it has. It's savvy enough to extract information from the human unconscious and clothe itself in that. The manipulation is so well articulated with some of these beings. I think people need to be aware of that as well.
Yes. Yeah. Never trust the way that a spirit presents itself to you, because it doesn't necessarily have its own physical appearance, right? Like this comes up in shamanic journeying as well. There's beings who they've never existed in the physical. They are just spirits. And so when they engage with you, it's like a form of body language. Like, we communicate with our bodies, but what if we could choose the body that we have in order to communicate some deep essence about ourselves, right? So many spiritual beings, they're picking bodies, appearances that work within your cultural context to convey some meaning, let's say. That's right. And so, you cannot trust that a being is actually some beautiful lady. You need some ways to confirm, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Another case, again, which I haven't documented it, but it was very disturbing, was a kind of interdimensional being that it was sexually assaulting a woman from like her teens through to 40 or 50 years of age. And that's something we could never get a grip of. You know, I often wonder in these cases, which are kind of beyond the limits at which you can deal with, what is the karmic backstory to this? You know, because the person who presents the case to you is kind of, this just happened. And of course, from the perspective of their present biographical memory, you know, it only goes back, you know, so many years, like, oh, I can remember till I was like 5 years of age. But there's a biographical continuum to this, which is kind of invisible. And so when these presenting issues come, you really have a big question, you know, why was this entity picking on you specifically? You know, where's the backstory to that? And I do feel that there's a huge amount to be explored in that sense.
What do you think is happening metaphysically when you're encountering that kind of interdimensional entity? Like, from whence is it coming? Like, or from where is it coming? Like, how's that happening?
I think it's happening, I mean, on the why issue, I think it's happening because these people have pledged themselves to these entities in past lives, or been pledged, so that the entity has a sense of ownership here. Because of course, the entity's sense of time, of continuity, it bridges many human lives. You know, they're not interested in the fact that you've popped up with a new persona. As far as you're the same spiritual entity, as far as they're concerned. And a deal is a deal. You know, a contract is a contract. That's one aspect of the why I suspect that these things happen.
Well, a similar thing that I have seen multiple times actually is when someone falls into a really negative practice, right? They are using their spirituality to harm others, right? Whether they are whatever kind of system of magic they're working in, or folk magic, and they make pacts with a lot of negative entities, and they you know, and then that person ends up dying. And I've seen entities reaching out to the grandchildren or the children of that person after that death, because it wants to continue that pact, it wants to continue that connection. And in fact, sometimes even the spirit of let's say the grandmother in this case, right, is helping to reach out to that person through dreams and through all this to try and bring them back into this connection with these entities. What you're saying there is curious, because it's like, well, maybe the next life of that person as well is, you know, that entity is going to try and draw them back in. So don't make pacts, people. Be careful if you do.
It's consequences, isn't it? I think the attachment can also be maintained through an artifact. You know, certain books may bring with them, you know, a certain heavy baggage, unless we're careful. And knowing how to deal with that, you know, that's another area of expertise, actually. Equally magical equipment that you may buy if you pick it up, you know, secondhand, if you don't know where it came from.
Going back to something you were saying earlier regarding cleansing negative beings and all this, and make sure you're ready for this. Magical items secondhand, I would say, is a definite no. Something that I've always found, like even used bookstores or especially antique stores and any kind of used clothing store or anything like that, cleanse the heck out of anything that you get. I mean, one of the worst attachments I ever got was at a antique store, big antiques market up in St. Jacobs in Ontario here. And I went with Lauva, and I had a complete personality change after I left that store. Like, I was just a complete jerk. I was lashing out at everyone. I was just in this horrendous mood. And when we got back, you know, Lauva finally did a cleansing on me, and she's drumming over me and everything, and there was this huge black mass in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
in my leg, and she just cast it out, and I ended up throwing up. I vomited in a
Oh
bucket,
yeah. Yeah.
and it was one of the worst attachments I'd ever had, because it caused a complete change in personality. I wouldn't say it was a possession. I was still there. I was still in control, but there was this so much emotional residue or overlay that was just completely
Yeah.
just like messing with my perspective
Right.
of reality.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, that definitely, people, when you go to antique stores and such, shielding and then cleansing when you leave, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of advice would you give along those lines? How can you avoid attachments?
Well, I think you need to be aware of there's often like an erotic or a power-based attachment feeling about some object or situation. So you know it's drawing on part of your personality, which is not normally to the fore. Okay, that's often a warning, I think, that you're picking up that vibration. So anyone who really gets onto that vibration is going to lock horns with it, basically emotionally engage with it.
Mm.
And I think at that point you can, kind of draw it with you into your own, or it can execute a transfer into your energy system. So there is a warning there,
Mm.
there is a warning, but it's not always heeded or recognized as needing to be heeded.
So that warning comes as an attraction, you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. There'll be
Interesting.
some element in your emotional makeup that connects with that artifact,
Mm.
and it's the artifact that has the negative effect behind it.
So
Okay,
unfortunately, let's say you're walking through a used bookstore or an antique store or something.
you're going to
Unfortunately,
be
that's the
drawn.
item you're going to buy because you're drawn to it.
Yeah.
There's an attraction
So
there.
it depending on the nature of it. I mean, most stuff is innocuous, but there are some books, and I got a gift of a book called Demoniality, and within it, it's like a early modern text, an account of um, various interactions with entities of different planes.
Okay.
Okay, but within it there was a ritual, like frontispiece, personalized, um, and it was clearly, it wasn't Golden Dawn, but it was that kind of ritual magic
Mm-hmm.
diagram. So, immediately we picked up that this gift had an energy about it. Okay, so it's
Mm-hmm.
just that's one example. I
Did
don't,
you
I
end up
guess,
cleansing it, or?
well, I got it behind me here. I'm
Yeah.
kind of happy with it.
Yeah.
Um, there's some energies which are kind of potent, but they don't scare me at all. They're like
Mm-hmm.
within my circumference. I'm not disturbed with that. That's kind of cool. That's okay.
Yeah.
Had there been a series of problems in the house, unexpected breakages, electrical shorts, disturbance, we had lots of cats, a dog, any disturbance in the field, so to speak, I'd have been on it.
Right.
I had an eye out for that. I was saying, I'm going to watch this for the first few weeks. Anything in the field, out of the place, I'm going to be on it in a flash. And nothing did happen. So I recognized that the woman who had this book had a power, was practicing ritual. There's no doubt about it. It looks to me like some form of Jewish ritual magic. I guess it's Kabbalistic. That's okay for me. I was interested in the book itself, actually, because it is a very interesting work. Demoniality, anyone is wishing to follow up on some very strange, apart from what's it, Voyage to Magonia, what's his name, Jacques Vallée's book.
Mm-hmm.
That and Demoniality are like catalogs of way out stuff.
I like your philosophy there, right?
Yeah.
Where there's nothing malicious that seems to have come with it, right? And you had no malicious acts happening in the house. And so at a certain point, it's like, well, look, it's its own thing. And
Yeah,
it's an ecosystem, right?
yeah,
It can exist within that, right? It's like
yeah,
you don't go and kill all the parasites and predators that are in the woods just to, make
yeah,
things super, like you have to respect that there's a spiritual ecology at a certain point,
yes,
and fine, things
absolutely
can
right.
exist with that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Just have to make sure it doesn't, become problematic for you, your pets, your partner, that kind of thing. If it's not problematic, then it's okay with me.
Exactly. And a big part of your book, or one section, is about ghosts and how ghosts fit in
All right.
with the healing field.
Yeah.
How would you say those kind of fit in with consciousness and what we've been talking about so far?
I think give like 4 categories of haunting over there, if I remember. Um, I think the first one is like an imprint just
Yeah.
on the landscape or on a building. So it's characterized by a short sequence that never alters. It's like, you'll see a figure at a certain time of day, certain days, and it always moves between 2 points and then like disappears. So it's like, I think of it as like something that's being projected onto the energetic field, which doesn't have sentient awareness. I suspect it doesn't have sentient awareness. And then
Exactly.
there's like people who've died and couldn't make it across. And there's a
And are
number of reasons.
confused, right?
They may be confused. They may not know they're dead. They may not be being spiritually uplifted in a way that their attachments are so strong they cannot let go. Okay, so they see the world as they want to see it, as though they were alive, and they like inhabit the space as though they were still in it,
It's like
and
that
they
Nicole
react
Kidman book,
to.
that Nicole Kidman movie, The Others, right? Where
Oh yeah,
she thinks she's
that's
alive. Oh, spoiler
wonderful.
alert, everyone! But she thinks
Yeah,
that she's alive, and actually, the ghosts are actually the people who've moved into the
yeah.
house, right?
Also, Sixth Sense is another one, another
Mm,
film.
yep.
Same kind of scenario. Yeah. So, in that case, I think you need to approach it with compassion. You need to broach the subject that they're dead now and that they can cross over, and I think you'll find that some of them just want you to go away. You're in their space basically uninvited, and you have to respect that, I think. But getting on to the other 2 forms of haunting that were relevant in healing processes. I think one is called kind of an intervention. So that the account was a woman suffering from this years-long grief at the loss of her partner, came for healing. And to get to the crux of the healing process, it came to Kenzie that she was washing up in the kitchen. And this figure was saying to her not to do it. And when she told the client this, she immediately connected with it, that was what her partner had been doing. And she was in the kitchen washing up all the time to try and recreate that atmosphere of when they were together. And this was blocking the release of the grieving process. It was essentially holding it in place. And his command to her through Kenzie, who didn't know any of this background, was, you have to stop doing this now. And when she got that, grief came to the fore, cleansed it with the meridian therapy, and that was it. It closed it over. So that was a kind of intervention of not a haunting really, but it was pretty like a haunting.
Mhm.
Okay. And I think the other kind of cases that I put there was, it was another kind of intervention, but to get something done that was left undone, right? So
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
in
a
that
petitionary haunting.
petitionary,
Exactly. Yeah.
so in that case, they were petitioning the client through the healer to get them to execute a series of property deals that they had been responsible for the family, but they had failed to execute. And so they came through specifically to, put this forward and to request that it be done. And that was also part of the heal. That's the strange thing. It also maps into that client's healing process,
Mhm.
which was the loss of this figure in their lives who'd been like a father or parent to them. So it all meshes together in a
Exactly. It's like the spirit needs healing if it's like disoriented, right? Or
yeah,
it's there to actually help in the healing of someone else.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Even that petitionary spirit, right? In the case that you mentioned where it's about inheritance, I believe.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, well, this needs to be done. It sounds like it's intersecting with ancestral healing there too, where it's
yeah,
like, okay, there's been something that needs to be righted in the
yeah,
past, right? So it's
exactly.
where would you, I guess a bit different, what do you think is going on with poltergeist phenomena?
Okay. Before we mention that one, there was a story before those 4 healing cases. Do you remember it?
The
Where
psychopomp work,
healers
right?
were going to an earthquake zone
Hmm.
and guiding people who had not acknowledged that they were dead yet, guiding them in the process of transitioning. And there's an area of healing. In that
Mm.
case, that was an esoteric group doing the healing on the astral plane.
I was really happy that you brought up that kind of psychopomp work, right? Guiding the souls
Yeah,
of the dead.
yeah, yeah,
That's something that my partner Lauva does every day. She actually has an oath where she's like, okay, I'm going to pass at least one soul a day. It's what I do. It's her public service to the spirits, Um, I was really glad that you brought that up because that's a huge part of healing, because it's the healing that you do immediately after death, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. On poltergeist, I don't really have a view. I mean, I recognize this phenomena. I recognized it can be caused by different things. Very often people say it's like a child doing it, which I can well imagine. On the other hand, like the initial stages in possession cases often involve that kind of disturbance as well. So it's kind
Mhm.
of, it's a kind of intimidation or oppression going on within the environment. It's often the first stage in oppression. So like it starts off with stuff going wrong, stuff getting broken. The next stage is like people waking up, they've got scratches and bruises that they can't account for. And then from there, they start getting obsessed into certain, I don't know, certain emotional states. And from there, it moves into full on possession. So that's demonic possession as opposed to theurgic possession, which we were discussing earlier. That's involuntary possession, let's say.
Yeah, I've always had the sense that poltergeist activity is much more an entity, maybe parasitic or more predatory. It's coming in to
Right.
get something. It's
Yeah.
not so
Right.
much a spirit who is disoriented, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really really fascinating, and I think you've done absolutely fantastic job with this book, the power of the
Thank you.
healing.
Thank you
Uh,
so much.
we're coming up on time here, so I just want to, is there any parting idea that you'd like to leave the listening audience with?
I mean, what I'd urge everyone to do is grab hold of a couple of these healing techniques and master them. Master them by, using them on yourself and then using them on others, and start taking a position of leadership in this healing process. There's so many of us in the world today oriented towards healing the planet, the environment, and others. And the more of us who do it, faster and better it goes.
I loved that piece from the last bit of your book on leadership there, on taking
All
a
right.
leadership role in this healing.
Yeah.
And elements of it are putting yourself in service, right? Putting
Yeah,
yourself in service to your community, right? It's not about you. It's about
yeah,
healing others and being
yeah.
open to change and all this. It's a
Uh,
wonderful lesson.
My perspective there is that the persona is far too narrow a shelf to bear the weight of meaning. Okay, so if we're like only on the persona or within the persona, we'll always be subject to these huge ups and downs. The gratification of something and then a steep decline until the next gratification. It's only when we step beyond the persona and start to create meaning do we find meaning. The meaning is not there inherent in the world for us to go and find it. We have to generate it. And that's the point about stepping from I to we, stepping away from the persona to a higher order of meaning and generating it from or through our action.
Well, I hope people get the book and follow that plan, because that is just, it's a perfect strategy. I mean, I'm reading this book and I'm like, yeah, that is exactly, if you want to heal yourself and heal the world and make this world a better place, these are the steps. So I
Yeah.
thank you very much for writing these words, because it was a fantastic book. Peter, where can people find you and where can they find your book?
Okay, the book is all over the digital internet, the Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and Inner Traditions, and Simon and Schuster. It's all over the place, so no problem with picking up a copy of it. It's also available as a Kindle download, so it's so easy. My work as an author is on petermarkadams.com. And my work with Kenzie in healing is on mindconnectionhealing.com.
Fantastic. Well, I urge everyone to check that out, and those links will be in the show notes down below. Peter, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been an absolutely fantastic interview. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure people will love it.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric. It's been my pleasure.
Have a wonderful day and take care. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.